Welcome back. Today we're going to dive into our 1.10b notes. And in this notes, we're going to continue our investigation of factoring with ax squared plus bx plus c. If you noticed in the previous notes, everything we did was with positive values. Now today, we're going to switch that up and we're going to throw in some negatives. So the first thing we're going to do is just review how do we handle those negatives. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that now this c value has a negative. That is a negative 12. And I want us to think of what that means, because this is going to deconstruct to give us x and x, because that's how we get x squared. But now, if we think about the two numbers we're looking for, how do we multiply to get a negative number? Well, that means that we're going to have a plus and a minus. One of the numbers we're looking for is positive. One of the numbers we're looking for is negative. So as I'm breaking this down into 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, now I have to keep in mind that when I place those numbers, one of them is going to be negative, because in order to multiply to negative 12, I need a positive and a negative. And so if I'm looking at my number choices, I think this is going to serve me well, because if I do a plus 2 and a minus 6, well, that's going to give me a 2x, and it's going to give me a negative 6x, and that is going to give us the negative 4x in the middle. So virtually the same as what we've been doing, but now we have to keep our signs very, very careful as we're working through these. So now that's a review. That's the type of factoring that we already did. Now let's talk about the new side of this. So when our a value is something other than 1. So let's talk about this one. So as I'm breaking this down, the first thing I notice is my c value is negative. So what that's communicating to me is I'm going to need a plus and I'm going to need a minus when I'm looking for those values. One value is going to be positive, one value is going to be negative. What are those values? Well, here it can be 1 and 4 or it can be 2 and 2. This time I was pretty nice. The first thing I gave you is 2p squared. So the way that we can get that, well, there's only one way, a 2p and a p. And now we're just going to start plugging those in just like we've always done. So I'm going to start with the 1 and the 4 because it's the top of my list. And so this is going to give me a 1p and an 8p. Now remember, the difference here is that we know one of those values is negative, okay? We talked about that. That's what I have up in blue. So because one of those is negative, now I have a choice to make, okay? I have to figure out which one of those to make negative so I get a positive 7. Well, hopefully you realize the 1p is what would be negative. So that's going to be a negative 1p and an 8p to get that middle term of a positive 7p. So what that translates to is 2p minus 1 and p plus 4 being how this thing is going to factor. And so that's going to be actually my first answer. So let's take a look at continuing at what else can happen with these things. So let's flip to the back and do another example together. 3x squared plus 2x minus 8. Once again, I'm going to be observant of my sign here. That is a negative, so that means I need a positive number and a negative number. It's one of those things I always have in the back of my mind as I'm going through all of these examples. So let's start breaking this apart now. So 8 can be 1 and 8, or it can be 2 and 4. I was also extremely nice with that 3x squared, because there's only one way to get that 3x squared. The only way is with 3x and x. So, since I see that, now let's start plugging our numbers in, okay? So I'm going to plug in 2 and 4, okay? So I'm going to try the 2 and the 4 first. And now let's see what those connections give me. So I have a 2x and I have a 12x now. Those are the two connections. And I need those to be able to give me a positive 2x. Now, keeping in mind that one of those would have to be negative, but the problem is, even if I make this a negative 2, that's still giving me a 10x. Or if I chose to make that the negative, that would be a negative 10x. So what you're going to see is actually here, that's not going to end up working for me. It's not possible for me to get the 2x that I need in the middle. So what that's telling me is that is not going to be the factoring that I'm looking for. So next step, let's reverse them. So let's try the 3x with the 4, and let's try the x with the 2. And let's see if that's going to help us. So let's make those connections. So I have a 4x and a 6x. And this is looking a lot more promising this time. So in order to get a positive 2x, I could make that 4x negative. So now negative 4x plus 6x, that is going to give me a positive 2x. So what I need to do is that needs to be negative and that needs to be positive. And now I have the proper factoring. All right, let's try one more with each other. So here, I'm going to have 6x squared minus 17x plus 10. All right, now this time I want you to notice something. So you've been watching our signs really carefully. This time I notice that that is a positive. Okay, and remember, when that C term is positive, what that means is we're looking for two positives or we're looking for two negatives, because those are the two ways to multiply to give us a positive. Well, how do I know which one it is? Well, remember then, I look to there. So if that's negative, what that means is I'm actually looking for two negative values this time. So remember those little techniques too from when we were doing all the normal factoring when A was still 1. All those things are still true. So now I already know before I start factoring that I'm looking for two negative values here. And now I can start breaking it down. So I can have a 2 and a 5, or I can have a 1 and a 10. And now this is one of those circumstances again, that 6x squared actually has two different things that can happen. You can get that with a 6x and an x, or you can get that with a 3x and a 2x. So in this one, we have the potential for a little bit more checking. So we have two kind of skeletons to search around to see if we can get it to work. Well, let's just do what we always do. Let's start plugging these in. So I have 2 and 5 on my list. So let's see if I can get that negative 17x squared. 2x and 5x. And we already talked about, we know both of those are going to end up being negative. Oh, I'm sorry, that is not a 5x. That is going to be a negative 30x. And if you notice, that is way off the mark, right? That one is not going to work. So that one I'm going to scratch off right away. Let's try reversing it. So let's try putting the 5 with the 6 and the 2 with the x, and let's see what happens. So I have 5x and 12x, and once again, we already talked about, we know both of those should be negative values here. And if you notice, negative 5x and negative 12x actually do give us that negative 17x we were looking for. So I need to make sure I put the signs properly in there. And now this actually is the proper factoring. So thank you for watching this for me. So this time for your summary, what I want you to think about is, how can I check my work? Okay, I want you to answer this question for me. How can I check that I have the right factoring, the proper factoring? Okay, and then what you're going to want to do is do worksheet number 12, or again, it'll be labeled 1.10b, and you want to do the first 6 problems. Okay, do those first problems. Check number 1 by foiling it out. Okay, so once you have your answer, I want you to check it by foiling. At this point, check in with me. Okay, so check in after you have that finished, because then the cool thing is, if all of them are right, you only have to do 2 more. Okay, I won't make you do the whole worksheet. I'll only make you do 2 more if you've done the entire first 6 properly. So that's my little reward for you for putting in the hard work to make sure you're doing it right, is I'm going to cut back on that worksheet for you. So once again, thank you for joining me. Check in with me so I can see you've done these notes, and then you can get started working on that worksheet.